Hello. My name is Miguel, and if I have to tell you one thing about me, is that I really, really love to code. So I decided to make a presentation about my love for coding. So we'll see how this goes. So first, I'm going to address the elephant in the room, which is my accent. People hear me speak, and apparently, of course, I don't hear an accent, but people ask me where I'm from. And when I'm not really, when I'm not really thinking that they're asking because of my accent, I say I'm American, and they say, you don't quite sound like an American, right? So I'm going to give you the long answer to that. And the long answer is that I lived most of my adult life in America, more specifically in Portland. But I was born in Argentina, in Buenos Aires. And I went to school there, and then shortly after I got my degree in computer science, I moved to the States. But I don't live in the States anymore. So as of, I think, 3.5 months ago, I live here in Ireland. In Drogheda, more specifically. Hey. So, sort of skipped this one because of the great introduction by Nicholas. But if you know me, you probably know me by one of these two books or my blog, which is also about Flask. Oops, sorry, wrong direction. I have a confession to make. Well, actually, before I get into this one, I'm going to make a first confession, which is unscripted. You've probably seen, maybe you have seen technical talks that I've done. I think I sort of got the hang of the technical talk. This is not a technical talk, so there is a potential chance that I might suck at this. So I apologize in advance. I'm very interested in hearing your feedback, good or bad, at the end. So please do let me know what you think about this. So, but yeah, the confession is that I code for pleasure. And I'm going to try to explain what that means with a few examples, all real. So I wrote my first line of code when I was in, I think I was still in primary school in Argentina. I was like 12, something like that. And the first, I'd say, real application that I wrote, it was, I was already in secondary school. I was going to a school that has business orientation. And in our accounting class, we had this awful homework that we had to do. But basically, we were given a list of transactions, and then we will have to do the books, right? Like people do in real life. And this is a system that I'm pretty sure is used here too. It's called double entry accounting. And I hope most of you don't know what that is, because it's awful. Right, but so we have to do this at home, right? It was homework. So you will spend like a couple hours doing it, and then the double entry means that each transaction needs to be recorded in two different ways, on two different columns in this accounting paper, right? And then you need to sum the two columns, and then if you did everything all right, the two columns had the same total, and almost always you ended up with like 20 cents different, or something, a little difference. And then you had to debug, right? So you had to redo everything and then find where you put that difference and fix it. So what I did is I wrote this application where instead of writing these transactions on paper, I entered them into this program. It's written in BASIC, by the way. BASIC was my first language back in those days. And the program kept the running total. So at the moment I made a mistake, the program told me right away. So I didn't have to wait until the end, grab the calculator and add everything and then find the mistake. I will find out right away. I could fix it and then I could keep going. So by the end, when I was done, I knew that the homework was done and all I needed to do is copy it back on paper. So this was my first thing. This was, by the way, on a computer that I'm not sure if it was known here in Ireland. I suspect here it was all about, the Sinclairs, in those days. But this was a Texas Instruments computer, TI-99. Hopefully some of you know it, which came with BASIC. A few years later, I moved on to the immensely popular Commodore 64. And this is one of the things that I did. This is a card game that it's actually the most popular card game in probably in Argentina and Uruguay. And I'm not sure if it's known in other Hispanic countries, probably not. But it's called Truco. And I wrote this game, also in BASIC. It was a lot of fun. I was still a teenager when I did this. I keep giving you examples of things that I coded just for fun, for pleasure. A few years later, I had a period in my life where I was interested in animation, and my wife and I had a wife at this point. So we were both interested in animation, and we were doing an animated movie. And actually, this was like the third. And this is the first one where we had characters that had to speak. So we invited our friends to record the dialogue. And so we had all the dialogue for the movie recorded. And when we went to animate, we found that we didn't have a good way to animate the mouths of the character, right? We could just make them open and close, and it looked horrible. Right, so I wanted the mouth to move exactly to match the sound from our friends, right, the recorded sound. So I came up with this idea where I wrote this application where you load an audio file, it gets segmented into frames, and then you can hear each frame individually. And then if you hear that short sound, you will know which of all the different mouths, which you can see listed on the left, to use for that frame. And then you will assign it, and you will see it in the sort of a spreadsheet that you see at the bottom. And then after you're done, or while you were working on this, you could press the play button in the toolbar, and you will hear the sound, and then the little preview on the top right will animate the mouths that you selected. For each mouth, you had to provide a picture, right? And this allowed us to complete that movie and make it look decent, right? We were not great animators, to be honest, but this looked very good. So back in those days, there was no Twitter, no Facebook, so the way we used to socialize online was, does anybody know? Mailing lists, state of the art. So one day someone on a computer animation mailing list asked about how people animated mouths, that he was having the same problem we had. And I responded with a couple of screenshots, and the feedback, people was very excited about it. So I decided to put it up on the internet for people to download and use. And what started, that started something really huge for me. I spent, I think, about 12, 13 years from that time maintaining this application. And this is how it looked near the end, when the final version, when I decided that I wasn't interested in maintaining it anymore. And it was a huge opportunity to learn about a lot of different things, 3D graphics, audio processing, how to develop an application that runs on Mac and Windows from the same source code, because this one, you can see that this is a Mac screenshot. Speech recognition, which you don't see here, but it did, a bunch of things. So a lot of opportunities came from that thing. I'm going to give you one last example. You probably, some of you, if you ever Googled anything about Flask, chances are you ended on my blog at some point. So this was, I think it was around 2012 that I wanted to start a blog. It was sort of a friendly competition with my wife, which had been blogging about a completely different thing for a while. And, you know, basically, it was sort of a challenge. I wanted to blog too. So I really didn't know what to blog about. So sort of as a way to start thinking about that, I decided to write my blog instead of using WordPress or Blogger, which was very popular those days. So I wrote my blog, and I selected this framework that wasn't very known, right? Flask, have you heard of it? And by the end, I had, you know, a ton of ideas to things to blog about. So I decided to start blogging about how to write a blog, and that's actually the Flask mega tutorial that you know that's been that did so well and still does. So I hope by now you get an idea of what I mean by coding for pleasure or for fun. Note that, you know, this is pretty much it spans too many years. I mean, so many that, you know, at this point I don't even want to count them anymore, right? Because I don't want to be seen as old, right? At some point, you know, there's no point in keep adding years to your experience because, you mean, you have too many. So I didn't tell you anything about work, right? I mean, throughout all those years, I've been working professionally, but I'm not here to talk about that. This is what I think is important. This is what gives me the, you know, the happiness in my life, I guess. So you're probably wondering why, right? You spend, you know, the whole day working, and then you go home and keep coding. So I see it. You know how people kill time spending solving crossword puzzles or Sudokus, you know, that type of thing. So for me, coding is like that. I see it as a vacation. I really enjoy it. So I make a separation between what I do at work, which you know, a lot of times is interesting, but a lot of times it's not. Versus this, which is 100% interesting. So, you know, why I do it, and my first reason is why not, right? If we agree that you know, solving crossword puzzles is, you know, a decent way to kill time, then why not writing code, which is also about solving puzzles, right? Much more interesting puzzles, if you ask me, right? But no offense to those who like to solve crossword puzzles, right? My wife is one of them, by the way. So basically, that's my view. One thing that I find that is very refreshing about code is that, you know, the range of things that you can do with code is so wide, right? That doesn't matter your level of experience. You always want to find something that is at the right level for you, that it's going to be easy enough that you can finish it, and it's also going to have a little bit of hard in it to make it not boring, right? And then those definitions of easy and hard are going to progress with you, and each time, you know, each new project that you take on, it's going to be a little bit more involving, more challenging. So I've been going at this for many years, and I have no intention to stop. I still keep finding things that I don't know, that I want to learn, and that still are challenging. So another thing that I think it's very important, and I think people, sometimes they fail to realize, because a lot of people associate coding with work. When you work on a personal project, you are the boss, right? It's all about you. And something that I really like is I don't need permission, I don't need approval, I don't have deadlines. It's just for fun. I can do it on my time. If I don't have time, I can do it tomorrow. It doesn't really matter. I find that if you were to work on something and you find that it's very hard, you can switch to something that's easier. That's actually happened to me many times. Eventually, I sort of learned how to tune myself to projects that I was pretty certain that I would be able to complete, even though there were things that I needed to learn and learn something new to complete them. So they remained interesting. So if you, I'm trying to convince you that this is a good thing. If you still think that, well, wait, I'm working 8 hours a day, 10 hours a day in coding, and you're asking me to keep coding when I get home, and you find that that's not interesting, that maybe this isn't for you. I find it refreshing because I get to do something that I enjoy. Another thing that maybe you say is that, well, I don't have time, right? I'm married, I have kids, and I do too, by the way. But really, because you are in control, you don't really have to spend a lot of time on this, right? You have no deadlines. So if you can find an hour here and there, maybe you can do a project that you find interesting. Another thing that I noticed, I said I have kids. I made an interesting observation about kids. Kids grow, they grow up, right? So if you start now, even though you may not have a lot of time, you will eventually. So start now and be ready for when you do. So anyway, all these reasons that I think, at least for me, made it a no-brainer to spend time with this. So, you know how it's pretty standard that pretty standard given advice is that to improve, to advance in your career, you create a personal project, right? So, okay, I'm not saying that. Let's not do that, okay? I don't do it for that. The way I go about it is in a completely different way. So as you probably noticed from the examples, I basically look at my life and see how I can improve it, right? Forget about work. This is about making changes in my life. So I found that if I go about it this way, at the end, when I complete a project, I am happier because I improved an aspect of my life, right? I wanted to do a movie, I couldn't. After I finished that tool that allowed me to animate the mouths, I could. So, good improvement. So each time I completed a project, and of course I have, hundreds of things that I've done over the years, right? I'm just giving you a few examples here. Each little one gave me more experience, but more importantly, it allowed me to solve a problem in my life. So for that alone, I think this was and is great for me. So this is for a lot of people, and I talk about this with a lot of people, and a lot of people associate coding with work, and for that reason, they cannot separate their work life from something like you do for fun, like you're playing, right? So luckily for me, it's not a problem. And I think the reason is that I started coding when I was a kid, basically, right? I was like 11 or 12, right? So I had no obligations. My parents bought a home computer. There weren't even personal computers at the time, right? Home computers, you get one for the home, right? And with the computer, you get a manual. And in those days, computers were marketed as being things that you program, right? It's not like a machine that gives you YouTube or Netflix, right? The manual that came with the computer was a basic programming manual. You learn how to program, right? So, that's what I did, right? Because I wanted to learn how to use the computer. So it seemed like play then, and it still seems like play now for me. I wanted to highlight that because I think you need to try hard. So some people, for some people, it's harder, but you should try to separate that and think about the projects that you want to do for fun, and forget about your career and technology. All of that. The standard advice, as I said before, is that you for example, very common, I need to learn React so that I can get a better job, right? Or Django or whatever, X, right? So I don't go about it that way. I find something that I'm passionate about, and then I pick a technology that maybe I'm curious about, and then I use the technology as an excuse to complete my project, and not the other way. So this is very hard. The other one was easy for me. This one was very hard. So how they say that the trees that fall in the forest, they make no noise unless someone is there to hear about them, right? So this is the same. I think you should make an effort to show the things that you do. And in my case, this was very hard. That day when I posted on that mailing list about my animation program, I thought it about 1,000 times. I wasn't sure. I didn't know if it was going to go well or not. I'm glad that I did eventually talk about it because it gave me great things. The advice that I can give you, which is not what I did in this case, you could really start slow. And the best way you can use to start getting used to share what you do and start participating in the community is to blog about what you do. I think writing a blog is a pretty safe a pretty safe activity, right? I mean, you can convince yourself that nobody will see it, right? If you don't tell anyone, but you can do it anyway, right? So this is probably what I recommend as the first approach. If you mount the courage to go to a meetup where you live and talk about it, even better. For me, this was many years later that I really got the idea that I had to do it. Basically, I was very afraid. So, in case you don't believe me, so this is what I did when I published the very first article in the mega tutorial. So this is what I did, right? So I think, if you look at it and you try to analyze it, maybe you can say that this is a great article because that person liked it and retweeted it, right? So you could tell that there were great things to come from this. Right? But I took this screenshot yesterday, by the way. So you can see, right? I didn't get a lot of traffic back then. I would say the whole tutorial took me over a year to write, the first version of it at least. I would say the first year, so almost through the completion of the tutorial, I had some people that were following the tutorial and commented on the blog with questions, but it was pretty much like 1-2 likes, not much activity. One day, someone asked me to participate in a podcast, and this was probably 2 years after this. I was very nervous about that, and then one thing led to another. I mounted the courage to go to my, this was in Portland, so to the meetup there. And, I talked about Flask, of course, what else? And, one thing led to another, and here we are. So I'm not sure if you're convinced, but basically what I'm trying to tell you is that the things that I did for fun are the things that gave me the most wins in my life. I mean, everything except money, maybe. That was not a joke. It's important. So the thing that I didn't know is that when maybe if you do all this, you start doing things that you are very passionate about, and then you start showing them off, and maybe looking at the things that other people do because they're also passionate about, and you start interacting in the community, I noticed that things started to happen. Weird things, unexpected things. And, I sort of, now I can see the pattern. I didn't realize that this was going on. So I'm going to give you examples, right? I showed you a few examples of things that I did, right, during my life. And all these examples that I showed you, they all have an interesting story behind them. I didn't tell you the ending on any of them. So, for example, the accounting cheating homework application. So I went to school, and I told some of my friends about it, and the ball started to run, and a lot of kids that were not my friends also found out, and it was interesting because you can probably guess this. I was a nerdy kid in school, very nerdy, right? So after I did this, people still thought I was nerdy. That didn't change, but I was a different kind of nerdy. People thought that I had a purpose. All that nerdiness could be used for good, if you know what I mean, right? So I was sort of a cool nerd after that. So it gave me new friends, actually. So that's one. So the card game. So that game was done on a Commodore 64, as I mentioned. Some of you know this. When you wanted to save a program in a Commodore 64, you used a cassette tape, right? There was no, diskettes came later. There was no network, no internet, no nothing, right? So you had to use like a boombox or something like that connected to the computer through a cable. And then you saved it as a collection of noises. So because of that, I've lost all the things that I've done in those days. I don't have anything. But this game, which is the one that I was most proud of, I shared it with some of my friends in those days, right? Other friends that I also have Commodores in their homes. I don't know who, but one of them kept distributing it, well, maybe more, right? Some people kept giving it to their friends and so on. So one day, my father is reading the newspaper, and he finds an ad that says it's a software shop. And by the way, this is all pirated software. In Argentina, in those days, that was the only kind, right? So there was a shop that was selling software, and they say, we got a game of Truco now, which is this game. So we said, interesting. So we went to see, just to see the competition, I guess. And the surprise was that it was my game, right? So one of my friends, I don't know who, gave it to someone who gave it to someone, and eventually someone pirated the game. They erased my name, and they started selling it and making money with it. So first of all, I felt furious, right? I wanted to sue their asses, right? But I was still in Argentina, and the sue their ass thing, you sue ass, people's asses in America, and that was a few years later, right? that wasn't the place to do that. So, basically I had to eat my rage, right? There was nothing I could do. There was no laws of intellectual property, none of that existed. It was too new. On the other side, so this was one side, but on the other side, it felt interesting that someone was making money with something that I did, right? I didn't think it was possible, right? I didn't think it was that great. So it made me realize that maybe I could do this for a living eventually, right? So it was good and bad. And what I can tell you today is that another thing that's good is that I can show you a screenshot of the game thanks to the guy who pirated it. Because thanks to that person, this game is now in all the emulation sites. And I can download the pirated copy of my game and play it. Right? I've made many more games in those years, and they're lost because nobody has them. They were in tapes, and the tapes are lost. So I guess in a way I have to thank this person, maybe. So what's next? So the mouth animation, right? So I did this thing, and I told you that I put it on the internet, and then a year later, after I did all this, my wife and I, we had some savings, and we decided to take a vacation, take a holiday, and we were still in Argentina, and we went to Los Angeles, and we arranged it so that it was at the time that the SIGGRAPH conference, which is one of the biggest, I'm not sure if now it's that big, but it used to be huge in those years. So the SIGGRAPH conference, computer graphics conference, right? So we went, we spent our holiday at the same time this conference was in LA, and we wanted to visit the conference, right? Because the exhibition was something to write about. It was very good. So I was walking through the aisles of the exhibition, and not once but twice people recognized me by looking at my badge, right? So how's it possible, right? So just saw my name and they remembered that I was that guy from Argentina that, blah, 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 all that. So very exciting stuff. So I started talking with one of these two people that recognized me. And so he tells me, well, I work for an animation studio in Portland, and our software developer quit, and they're looking for a software developer. Would you? I mean, if you want, I can introduce you to the senior animators that are right here, and if you want. And I said, okay, sure, why not? So I go to talk to these two people. One of them also knew the application that I've made. He downloaded it at some point and used it. So, to make a long story short, 4 months later, I was in Portland, right? And this was something that changed my life, basically, right? Because I started doing, basically what I'm trying to say is that by doing things that I enjoyed, I made work match what I enjoyed, instead of, the traditional advice, which is, be strategic, learn React, learn Django, and then, you'll be better positioned. I did none of that, right? I just did what I wanted. And then, opportunities to do what I wanted started to show up at my door. So very cool, right? And so then I lived in the US since then. Since then and until July, right? I moved here, to be exact. I have one more, right? What was next? The blog, right? So you probably know this one. So I wrote the blog, I started writing the articles, not a lot of traction in the beginning, but then one day, email comes from an editor at O'Reilly. Hey, would you like to talk? I'm gonna be in Portland for a conference next week. And I said, okay, sure. And I left that meeting with a verbal agreement to write the book on Flask, which is something that, English is not even my language, right? So, I mean, I didn't think I could write a book in English, which, by the way, I was very concerned about that. So when, the phase of writing the book that was the most terrifying for me was when you're done and you need to send it to the proofreader, because I said, she's gonna kill me, right? And it turns out the thing that I realized I don't know about in English is to insert commas, because she changed very little of my English text, but she inserted commas left and right. But anyway, it's another thing. It's another thing that I never expected, and that ball of the blog started to grow, and even now it keeps growing. And basically, I'm at a point where I got used to surprises, right? So instead of actively looking for things, I just wait, and things sometimes happen, sooner than later in many cases. So anyway, this is all true experiences. I hope I convinced a few of you to follow your dreams with a personal project, and if you do, show me what you do, because I will be very interested to see what results from me sharing my story. I think I'm doing good on time, I think. So I think I'm going to end it there. Thank you so much.